The night sky over Earth burned with unnatural light, an eerie glow casting shadows where none should exist. Across continents and oceans, the heavens split apart as colossal ships descended, their hulls obsidian black, absorbing the feeble glow of the stars they blotted out. Cities fell into chaos, communications faltered, satellites failed. The very fabric of the modern world seemed to unravel as an unseen force blanketed the planet in silent dominance. And then the voice came. A projection, impossibly vast, shimmered above the Atlantic Ocean. It took form. A towering figure with a serpentine visage, reptilian eyes glowing like molten gold. His armored form exuded an aura of absolute authority, his gaze sweeping over the planet as if surveying a newly acquired prize. He was Veilcor Zal, Emperor of the Zalorian Empire, ruler of 1,000 conquered worlds. His voice echoed across the planet, translated into every language with eerie perfection. "People of Earth," he declared, his voice deep, measured, filled with the certainty of an emperor who had spoken these words 100 times before, on countless conquered worlds. "Your civilization has been deemed primitive, your world unclaimed. You are now subjects of the Zalorian Empire. Surrender and you shall be permitted to serve. Resist and you will be eradicated." The message was clear. There was no plea, no negotiation. This was not an offer, it was a fact. Across the world, leaders scrambled. The United Nations entered an emergency session, but their discussions were meaningless. The militaries of the world went on high alert, but their weapons felt insignificant against the cosmic leviathans hovering above. Fighter jets screamed into the skies, only to vanish mid-air, disintegrated without a trace, before they could even reach the invaders. Nuclear silos were armed, but deep down, every general and strategist knew there was no winning this war. And yet, before the first human act of defiance could take place, something happened. Something no one, not even the Zalorians. A second projection appeared in the sky, not from the Zalorian fleet, but from somewhere else. Unlike the Emperor's holographic presence, which radiated power through technology, this one was different. There was no image, no figure, only a deep, resonant voice that seemed to vibrate in the bones of every living creature on the planet. It spoke not in anger, nor in fear, but in absolute certainty. "Leave this world now, or be destroyed." The words shook the very fabric of reality. Silence followed. A silence that stretched across battlefields, war rooms, and the depths of space. It was as though the universe itself had paused, waiting. On his command deck, Emperor Veilcor Zal's expression hardened. He turned sharply toward his war council, his golden eyes narrowing. "Trace that signal," he ordered, his voice sharp with irritation, not fear. "Find out who dares interfere with my conquest." His officers scrambled, working furiously at their control panels. But there was nothing. No source, no signal, no technology known to the Zalorian Empire could explain what had just happened. And then something vanished. One of the dread carriers, a vessel the size of a continent, equipped with enough firepower to obliterate planets, simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no wreckage, no warning. One moment the ship was there, its monstrous silhouette blotting out the stars. The next, it was gone. Not destroyed, not damaged, gone. Emperor Veilcor Zal rose from his throne, his massive form rigid with disbelief. He turned his gaze toward the void where the dread carrier had been, his mind racing through possibilities. Had an unseen force fired upon them? Was this some advanced cloaking failure? But deep down he knew this was not a weapon. This was something else entirely. Across the Zalorian fleet, officers and soldiers whispered in growing fear. The warlords of the Empire, conquerors of 1,000 civilizations, had never seen such a thing. They had never encountered an enemy capable of making a vessel disappear without a trace. The voice returned. "You were warned." And then, across the sky, vast symbols began to form. Impossibly large, glowing runes of an unknown language. They shimmered with an energy that no Zalarian sensor could decipher. Ancient, powerful, and incomprehensible. Veilcor Zal clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. "Enough of this sorcery," he growled. "Prepare the main cannon, target the largest city and fire." His officers hesitated. "I said fire," he bellowed, his voice shaking the bridge. Reluctantly, his crew obeyed. The Annihilator-class warship, the most powerful weapon in the Zalorian fleet, began charging its primary weapon. A sphere of condensed plasma, hotter than a star's core, gathered at the heart of the warship, preparing to rain death upon the earth below. The target? Tokyo. And then the warship vanished, just like the first. No explosion, no energy discharge, nothing. Only the void remained. Panic spread through the fleet. The once unbreakable discipline of the Zalorian forces fractured as soldiers stared at their screens in horror. Across the vast empire, they had faced enemies with powerful fleets, devastating superweapons, and desperate defenders. But never before had they encountered something that simply unmade their ships from existence. The Emperor's claws dug deeper into his palms, drawing his own blood. His mind raced, fighting against the rising tide of realization. They had never asked themselves the question, why was Earth unclaimed? Why had no other galactic empire, no opportunistic warlords, no cosmic scavengers ever attempted to conquer this seemingly defenseless planet? What force had kept them away? Veilcor Zal knew the answer now. Something older than the Zalorian Empire, something that did not rule from the shadows or wage war in the stars. It did not need fleets, it did not need weapons, it simply was. And it had chosen this world. Earth was not alone. It never had been. The Emperor's breathing grew ragged. He forced himself to speak, his voice now lacking the arrogant certainty it had carried mere moments ago. "All ships." His words came slower now, as though admitting them pained him. "Retreat." The command spread across the fleet like wildfire. Warships turned, engaging their hyperspace drives. One by one, the mighty fleet of the Zaloran Empire, the unstoppable armada that had never fled a battlefield, disappeared into the void. The skies of Earth cleared. The night returned to its natural darkness. The stars, once hidden, twinkled once more. And then, just as it had arrived, the unknown presence vanished. The glowing runes in the sky faded. The voice, which had spoken only twice, did not speak again. But the warning had been given, and the Zalurian Empire, for all its power, had listened. Somewhere, in the cold expanse of space, Veilcor Zal sat in silence aboard his flagship, staring out at the void. His empire had waged war for centuries, conquering worlds without mercy. But today, for the first time, he had encountered something that had not fought back, only war, and in doing so, had won. The Emperor closed his eyes. He would never forget this day, and neither would the galaxy. The Zalorian fleet burned through space at impossible speeds, their engines screaming as they tore through the void, putting as much distance between themselves and Earth as physics would allow. Inside the Emperor's flagship, the bridge was eerily silent, save for the quiet hum of instruments and the occasional sharp breath of an officer, struggling to suppress their fear. Emperor's Veilcor Zal sat rigidly in his command throne, his golden eyes locked on the vast emptiness before him. His mind churned through 1,000 possible explanations, yet none satisfied him. He had spent centuries conquering civilizations, breaking the will of planets, raising entire species to dust, but never, not once, had he encountered a force like this. It was not just the destruction of his ships that haunted him. It was the way they had been erased. Without effort, without hesitation, and without leaving behind so much as a trace. There was no war, there was no battle. There was only a warning, and then there was nothing. The voice, He had not spoken in anger, not in desperation. There had been no threats, no ultimatums, only a single simple command. And then, reality had obeyed. "Commander," he finally spoke, his voice even, betraying none of the unease clawing at his mind. The officer in question nearly flinched at being addressed directly. He swallowed hard before responding, "Yes, Supreme One. Have we identified the nature of the force that destroyed our warship?" There was a pause, just a fraction too long before the commander answered. "No, Supreme One. There is no record of any known species, technology, or phenomenon capable of such an act. Have we detected any pursuit?" "No, Supreme One. No vessels have followed. No energy signatures have been traced. It is as if—" The officer hesitated. Veilcor turned his gaze toward him, his expression dark. "Speak." The commander swallowed again. "It is as if whatever was on that planet was not interested in us once we left." A murmur spread through the bridge. Soldiers and officers exchanged glances, their disciplined exteriors cracking under the weight of unspoken thoughts. Veilcor's claws drummed once against the armrest of his throne. "How many times have we encountered a species that could wipe our fleets from existence, Commander?" The officer stiffened. "Never, Supreme One. How many times has an empire larger than our own dared to threaten us?" "Never, Supreme One." "Then tell me," Veilcor said, his voice dropping to something almost dangerous, "why was this planet different?" The commander had no answer. Veilcor leaned back into his throne, his mind calculating. If Earth had belonged to a highly advanced civilization, there should have been some indication. If an unseen empire had claimed the planet, there would have been defenses, fleets, something. But there was nothing. Nothing but a voice. He exhaled slowly, forcing his thoughts to remain logical. There was a way to solve this puzzle. He would not allow himself to believe in superstition, in myths of cosmic deities or ancient forces that lived outside the bounds of reason. There was always an answer, and he would find it. "Set course for the Prime Core," he commanded. "I want the full records of every archive in the Empire searched for any mention of Earth." The officers hesitated, uncertain of their emperor's intent. Veilcor's gaze snapped toward them. "Now!" he growled. At once the command was relayed, and the ship's trajectory shifted, redirecting toward the heart of the Zalorian Empire. Veilcor sat motionless, staring out at the void, the memory of that voice playing over and over again in his mind. It had given only one warning, and it had been enough. The journey back to the Prime Core took several rotations, a length of time that felt infinitely longer to the Zalorian officers who had witnessed the impossible. Whispers spread through the ranks, rumors that this was not a mere failure of conquest, but something far worse. Something that defied the Empire's very understanding of the universe. The Emperor's warlords, hardened by centuries of battle, had begun speaking in hushed tones of superstitions, the kind of whispers that were dangerous to an empire built on logic and power. Upon arrival, the flagship docked at the Imperial Citadel, a monolithic structure floating at the very heart of Zalorian space. It was here that the greatest minds of the Empire gathered, where history was stored and where the truth of the galaxy was meticulously recorded. Veilcor wasted no time. "Archive chamber," he ordered as he strode through the Citadel's grand halls, flanked by his highest-ranking commanders. The towering doors of the chamber slid open with a deep resonance, revealing an enormous sphere of shimmering data, suspended in the center of the room. The Grand Archivist, an aged Zalorian whose deep crimson scales had dulled with time, turned as the Emperor entered. His 4 eyes blinked in mild surprise. "Supreme One," he greeted with a bow, "what knowledge do you seek?" Earth. A silence settled over the chamber. The Grand Archivist's expression flickered with something almost imperceptible. Hesitation? No. Recognition. Veilcor caught it immediately. "You know of it." The archivist lowered his head slightly. "Only whispers, Supreme One. Old texts. Forbidden records, forbidden. The word sent a ripple of unease through the assembled warlords. Ekra, explain, Veilcor commanded. The archivist gestured and the sphere of data shifted, streams of ancient records unfolding before them. Symbols long abandoned by history flickered in and out of view, and then a single entry was pulled into existence. It was unlike any record Veilcor had ever seen. The text was crude, fragmented, as though transcribed by those who had glimpsed something they could barely comprehend. It was not a historical document, nor a scientific record. It was a war. "Read it," the Emperor ordered. The archivist's voice was careful as he spoke. "There is a world that must never be touched. It is a place that belongs not to the stars, nor to the empires of flesh. It is a world that was claimed long before time was measured. It is guarded not by war, nor by fleets, but by a force beyond reckoning. The ancients called it the Silent Planet. The May who came before us knew it by another name, Earth." The words settled over the room like a heavy shroud. Veilcor's golden eyes flickered. "Who wrote this?" The archivist shook his head. "The origin of this record is unknown. It has passed through many civilizations before us. It was already ancient when the Zalorian Empire was young." The Emperor's claws tightened. "And no one has ever questioned it?" "Many have," the archivist admitted, "and those who did never returned." The silence in the chamber deepened. Veilcor Zhao, Emperor of the Zalorian Empire, destroyer of worlds, felt something foreign settle deep in his chest. He had come to Earth expecting conquest. He had believed it to be nothing more than another planet to be claimed. Instead, he had trespassed. He had ignored a warning that had existed long before his empire had even drawn its first breath. And it had let him go, not out of mercy, not out of diplomacy, but because it did not consider him a threat. That realization sent a cold, unfamiliar sensation crawling down his spine. He had believed his empire to be the most powerful force in the galaxy, but now, for the first time in his existence, he understood the truth. The Ixorian Empire was nothing compared to whatever watched over that planet, and he would ensure that they never made the mistake of returning. Without another word, he turned and strode from the chamber. The record remained suspended in the air, the ancient warning glowing softly, unread for millennia. It would not be ignored again. The halls of the Imperial Citadel were silent, the kind of silence that did not come from the absence of sound, but from the weight of unspoken thoughts. Veilcor Zell strode through them with measured steps, his mind a storm of calculations and uncertainty. The words of the Grand Archivist echoed in his thoughts, intertwining with the impossible events he had witnessed above Earth. It is a world that must never be touched. A warning from civilizations long dead. A message passed through the ruins of empires that had once thought themselves eternal. And yet, the Zalorian Empire, the most dominant force in the known galaxy, had nearly made the same mistake. Nearly. In his throne chamber, the glow of holographic projections flickered across the towering obsidian walls. His warlords and high commanders stood before him, their postures stiff, expressions carefully neutral. But he could feel it, the tension, the discomfort. None of them wanted to be the first to speak. None of them wanted to admit what they had all felt that day. Fear. Veilcor's golden eyes moved from one face to another, his presence alone enough to make even the most hardened of them shift under his gaze. Finally, he broke the silence. "Speak." For a moment, no one moved. Then General Karsith, a veteran of countless planetary conquests, took a step forward. His voice was steady, but there was something in it. A hesitation that had never been there before. "Supreme One," he began, "we require clarity. The events above Earth were unlike anything we have encountered. Our fleet was," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "rendered powerless. If this was the work of a rival empire, we must determine its origin. If it was something else, his words trailed off and the room fell into silence once more. Veilcor exhaled slowly. These were the finest military minds in the Empire, leaders who had crushed entire civilizations with ruthless precision, and yet they were grasping at explanations that did not exist. It was not an empire, Veilcor said at last. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign. To admit that something else had intervened, that something outside their understanding had warned them away, it went against everything he had ever known. Warlord Zethus, the most ambitious of his commanders, narrowed his eyes. Then what was it? Veilcor let the question hang in the air before answering. Something beyond us. The room stiffened. Even the warlords who prided themselves on their unshakable composure could not fully suppress the reactions that followed, a ripple of unease, a tightening of jaws, the silent exchange of glances. They had all felt it, in the present voice. "Do you suggest," Zethus said carefully, "that we abandon Earth entirely?" Veilcor turned his gaze on him. Zethus was bold, always pressing for expansion, for conquest. But even he did not look fully convinced by his own question. "We do not speak of this again," Veilcor said finally. "Earth is forbidden. It does not belong to us, nor to any empire in this galaxy. It never has. It never will." Karsith inclined his head in agreement, though his face remained grim. The others did the same, but there was something in the air now, an unspoken understanding. They had seen an empire greater than their own. One that did not need fleets, one that did not need war, one that simply was, and it had given them a single chance to leave. They had taken it. The Exalaran Empire had never fled from anything before, but now the weight of that decision settled upon them like an invisible chain. There was no shame in retreating from a force that did not fight in ways they understood. There was only survival. The warlords began to leave, one by one, until only Veilcor remained in the vast throne chamber. He let out a slow breath, staring into the depths of the void beyond the towering glass windows. He had spent centuries conquering, bending civilizations to his will, carving his empire into the stars. And yet there was something terrifying about the knowledge that for all their power, all their dominance, they had been spared, not because of diplomacy, not because of mercy, but because the thing that watched over Earth had chosen to let them go. He did not know whether that made him fortunate or doomed. The news spread through the empire in careful whispers, in controlled releases of information. Official reports labeled the Earth campaign as an unviable conquest, its resources deemed insufficient for annexation, its location too distant for strategic occupation. The truth, however, was not so easily contained. The commanders who had witnessed it firsthand carried their experiences with them like an unseen brand, and soon, rumors flourished in the shadows of the empire. They spoke of a world that had no fleets, no armies, no defenses, yet had turned away the might of the Zalonian Empire with a single warning. They spoke of ships that vanished without a trace, of a force that existed beyond the grasp of known science. Some dismissed it as superstition, others as a carefully orchestrated deception by some unseen galactic force. But those who had stood on the bridges of the Zalorian fleet above Earth, those who had felt the weight of that voice in their very bones, they did not question, they did not return, and neither did the Empire. Beyond the reach of the Zalorian fleets, in the infinite dark between galaxies, something watched. Not with eyes, not with technology, but with a presence that had existed long before the first empires had risen, before the first stars had burned in the void. It had seen civilizations rise and fall. It had seen conquerors, warlords, and gods declare their dominion over the cosmos, only to be reduced to dust by the passage of time. It did not interfere. It did not command. It simply ensured, and Earth, this small, fragile world, remained under its gaze. It had warned once. that had been enough.